The Galactic Arena stood as the largest coliseum in the universe, an enormous structure carved from the remains of a dead moon, its towering walls lined with banners from 100 alien civilizations. The air crackled with anticipation as thousands of spectators filled the seats, their voices merging into a deafening roar. Lights flickered across the stadium, illuminating the combat floor where warriors from different species prepared for battle. The annual Grand Tournament was about to begin, a spectacle where only the strongest survived, where champions became legends, and where one name would echo across the galaxy as the ultimate warrior. The reigning champion, Korvac the Unbreakable, stood on a raised platform, his four muscular arms crossed over his chest, his crimson eyes surveying the crowd with the confidence of a being who had never known defeat. For over a decade, he had crushed every opponent. Around him, warriors from all corners of the galaxy sharpened their weapons, adjusted their armor, and exchanged final words with their trainers. Some were covered in natural armor, others had cybernetic enhancements, and a few possessed abilities beyond human comprehension. This was a tournament for the best of the best, and no one expected anything less than a blood-soaked spectacle. Then, without warning, the energy of the crowd shifted. The murmurs began as soon as a lone figure stepped onto the combat floor. Unlike the others, he had no towering physique, no gleaming battle armor, no visible weapons. He was human. The audience fell silent for a moment before laughter erupted from the stands. XL Thar announcer, his reptilian face stretching into an amused grin, amplified his voice through the stadium speakers. Introducing a last-minute addition to the tournament. A warrior from a backwater planet. A species with no claws, no exoskeleton, and no natural weapons. Behold, he paused, mockingly drawing out the moment, the human. The crowd roared with laughter, some aliens pounding their seats, others shaking their heads in disbelief. They had seen countless warriors over the years, powerful beasts from war-torn worlds, assassins trained since birth, soldiers enhanced with the most advanced technology. But this was an insult to the tournament. Jason Cole stood motionless in the center of the arena, his expression unreadable. Dressed in a simple combat suit, he ignored the jeering crowd, his eyes scanning the battlefield, calculating every possible scenario. He had been in fights before, but nothing like this. The Galactic Arena was a place where warriors were expected to put on a show, to tear their enemies apart in the most brutal ways possible. He was different. He wasn't here to entertain, he was here to win. The first match was announced, and Jason's opponent entered the arena. A towering insectoid named Thrix, its bladed arms glistening under the artificial light, its mandibles clicking in hunger. Thrix had killed 3 competitors in last year's tournament. The audience's laughter faded, replaced by anticipation. They expected this to be quick, one clean strike, and the human would be nothing more than another forgotten name in the blood-stained history of the tournament. The gong sounded. Thrix lunged, its movements impossibly fast, its blades slicing through the air with deadly precision. Jason barely dodged, rolling to the side as the crowd gasped. Thrix didn't pause. It attacked again, its strikes relentless. Jason moved with calculated efficiency, staying just out of reach, studying his opponent's patterns. The audience, expecting an instant kill, was now watching in stunned silence. This human was surviving. Not just surviving, he was analyzing, adapting, learning. Thrix grew frustrated, its attacks becoming wilder. That was the opening Jason needed. As the insectoid overextended for a fatal slash, Jason twisted his body and delivered a precise strike to a weak joint in its exoskeleton. A loud crack echoed through the arena as Thrix screeched in pain, stumbling backward. The spectators leaned forward in disbelief. No one had ever exploited that weakness before. Before Thrix could recover, Jason moved in with a series of rapid strikes, each one landing in the exact points necessary to disable its movement. The towering warrior collapsed, unable to continue. For a long moment, silence hung over the arena. Then, a single voice cheered. Another joined. Soon, the stadium erupted in mixed reactions, cheers from those who recognized the brilliance of Jason's strategy, outrage from those who had bet against him, and stunned disbelief from those who thought humans were nothing more than weaklings. Jason stood over his fallen opponent, his breathing steady. He glanced up at the crowd, his expression calm, his body unharmed. He had made his point. He wasn't here to be a spectacle. He was here to win. The air inside the galactic arena was thick with tension. Thousands of alien spectators, still reeling from the humans' unexpected victory, murmured among themselves, their voices a mixture of awe, disbelief, and frustration. Jason Cole, the lone human warrior, had done the impossible. He had defeated Thrix, a feared and experienced combatant using nothing but speed, precision, and intelligence. The crowd, which had once mocked his presence, now watched him with curiosity. But admiration was still far away. Most believed his victory was nothing more than luck, a fluke that wouldn't last. His next fight, however, would determine whether he was truly a contender or just another footnote in the long history of the Grand Tournament. Jason stood in the waiting chamber, his muscles tense but his mind sharp. He had studied the other fighters, memorized their styles, their weaknesses, their overconfidence. He knew the galactic arena was not just about strength, it was a place where arrogance was punished and mistakes were fatal. His next opponent was even deadlier than Thrix. Vorin, a cybernetic warrior from the war-torn world of Kethar Prime, had never lost a match. His body was enhanced with reinforced metal plating, his limbs modified for speed and power, and his reflexes faster than any organic creature. He was a machine of destruction, built for war, engineered for efficiency. Where Thrix had been aggressive but predictable, Vorin was precise and relentless. He had fought countless battles, and he had ended each one in under a minute. When the gates opened, Jason stepped into the arena, his expression unreadable. Across from him, Vorin emerged, his metallic body gleaming under the stadium lights. The crowd erupted in cheers for the cyborg, their faith in his victory absolute. He was a warrior they respected, a champion who had earned his place through ruthless dominance. Jason, on the other hand, was still an outsider, a question mark, an anomaly they did not understand. The announcer's voice boomed through the arena, declaring the start of the match, and within seconds, Vorin moved. There was no hesitation, no wasted movement, only speed and precision. Jason barely had time to react as Vorin closed the distance in a blink, his cybernetic fists striking with the force of a cannon. Jason twisted his body, evading the first blow, but the shockwave from the impact rattled his bones. The second punch came instantly, aimed at his ribs, and he barely managed to roll away in time. The crowd cheered as Vorin pressed forward, his attacks a blur of metallic destruction. Jason knew he couldn't match his opponent in raw power. If he tried to fight head-on, he would be crushed. But he had one advantage: Vorin's enhancements made him predictable. Every move was calculated, optimized for maximum efficiency. And that was his weakness. Jason focused on Vorin's patterns, the way his body shifted before each attack, the split-second adjustments in his stance. He was fast, but he was programmed. And programming could be exploited. As another strike came for his head, Jason ducked at the last moment, feeling the rush of air as the metal fist passed inches from his face. Instead of retreating, he moved in close, too close for Vorin's large cybernetic limbs to maneuver properly. The cyborg hesitated for the briefest second in opening. Jason struck with a precise elbow to the exposed joint of Vorin's arm, sending a jolt through the circuitry. The crowd gasped as Vorin's limb twitched, momentarily unresponsive. Jason didn't wait. He pivoted behind his opponent, targeting the connection points in his armor, striking with ruthless efficiency. Each attack disrupted a different function: an actuator in the knee, a servo in the elbow, a sensor cluster near the neck. Vorin's movements became slower, less fluid. He was powerful, but he was not invincible. He had never fought someone who analyzed him like a machine, who saw his body not as an unstoppable force, but as a system with weaknesses waiting to be exploited. The fight continued, but the crowd had changed. The cheers for Vorin had turned into uneasy murmurs. They were no longer certain of his victory. They had never seen a warrior fight like this, not with brute force, but with strategy, patience, and perfect execution. Jason wasn't just surviving. And then it came. Varin overextended, his balance slightly off. Jason moved in instantly, delivering a powerful strike to the base of his spine, where his central control system was housed. The impact sent a surge of energy through Varin's body, forcing his systems to momentarily shut down. His towering form staggered, his glowing eyes flickering. And then, with a final, helpless lurch, he collapsed to his knees. The arena fell silent. No one breathed. No one spoke. Then, the first cheer rang out. And another. And another. It was hesitant at first, but it grew, spreading through the stadium like wildfire. Jason Cole had won. Again. And this time, it wasn't luck. It wasn't a fluke. He had beaten a warrior stronger than himself, not with power, but with intelligence. ASE stood over Voron's fallen form. Jason exhaled slowly, his gaze sweeping over the stunned faces in the crowd. They were beginning to see what he already knew. Humans were not the strongest, the fastest, or the most advanced species in the galaxy, but they were the most adaptable. And adaptability was the deadliest weapon of all. The galactic arena was no longer filled with laughter. The spectators, who had once mocked the presence of a human in their sacred tournament, now watched in stunned silence. Jason Cole had shattered their expectations, proving time and again that he was more than just a weak outsider. He had defeated Thrix with intelligence, dismantled Varin with strategy, and now, with 2 victories behind him, he was no longer just a curiosity, he was a threat. His name spread through the crowd like wildfire, whispered in disbelief and growing admiration. The underdog had risen, and the galaxy had no choice but to take notice. But Jason knew his battles were far from over. The deeper he advanced in the tournament, the deadlier his opponents became. The Grand Tournament was not designed for the weak, and now that he had proven himself, the real monsters would be unleashed. His next fight was against one of the most feared competitors in the arena, Gorvak the Executioner. A massive reptilian warlord from the savage world of Y-Tar, Gorvak had ended every match with brutal efficiency. He didn't just win, he crushed, he slaughtered. He entertained the crowd with his ruthless display of dominance. His body was covered in thick, plated scales, resistant to most weapons, and his sheer size made him a walking nightmare. No one had ever survived more than a few minutes against him. The betting tables were filled with gamblers, eager to see Gorvak tear the human apart. They believed Jason's luck had run out. When the gates opened, Jason stepped into the arena, feeling the heavy weight of thousands of eyes on him. Across from him, Gorvak stomped forward, his massive clawed feet shaking the ground. The towering beast let out a guttural snarl, his yellow eyes burning with amusement. To him, Jason was nothing more than another victim. The crowd, though more uncertain than before, still roared for the executioner. This was the moment they had been waiting for, the moment the human's fairy tale run would finally end. The gong sounded, and Gorvak charged. He moved with terrifying speed for a creature of his size, his claws slicing through the air. Jason barely had time to roll away before the ground where he had stood was torn apart. Dust and debris flew everywhere as Gorvak swung again, his monstrous tail whipping toward Jason like a battering ram. Jason ducked, barely escaping as the impact cracked the stone beneath him. He had expected Gorvak to be strong, but this was another level entirely. One clean hit, and he would be broken. But Jason wasn't here to trade blows. He was here to survive. He studied Gorvak's movements, watching how the massive beast relied on brute strength to overwhelm his opponents. That was his weakness. He fought like a predator hunting prey, expecting fear to slow his enemy down. Jason refused to give him that satisfaction. He moved constantly, forcing Gorvak to adjust, to waste energy on attacks that missed. The reptilian warlord growled in frustration, his slashes becoming more aggressive, his patience wearing thin. The first real opening came when Gorvak swung a massive fist at Jason's head. Instead of dodging away, Jason did the unthinkable, he stepped in. At the last second, he ducked beneath the blow and struck a precise elbow to the soft flesh beneath Gorvak's arm. The beast roared, stumbling slightly. The crowd gasped. No one had ever dared get that close to him and live. Jason took advantage of the moment, delivering a rapid series of strikes to the nerve clusters along Gorvak's ribs, targeting the few weak spots not covered by his thick scales. Gorvak howled in rage, spinning wildly, but Jason was already gone. He darted around the arena, forcing Gorvak to chase him, making him angrier with each missed attack. The beast's heavy breathing became more pronounced, his movements slightly slower. He was strong, but he wasn't used to fights lasting this long. He was a predator who ended battles in moments. Jason was forcing him into unknown territory fatigue, but Jason knew he couldn't drag this out forever. He needed a decisive strike, one that would end the fight before Gorvak landed a lucky hit. Then he saw it. In his anger, Gorvak left his throat exposed for just a second too long. That was all Jason needed. He sprinted forward, dodging another wild slash, and leapt. The entire arena held its breath as Jason, the tiny human, launched himself toward the towering executioner. In a single, fluid motion, Jason drove his fist directly into the nerve center at the base of Gorvak's throat. The impact sent a shock through the reptilian's massive body, his limbs locking up for a split second. That was enough. Jason landed, twisted, and delivered a brutal kick to the side of Gorvak's knee. The warlord's leg buckled, and he crashed to the ground, his enormous body shaking the arena. Silence. Gorvak the Executioner, one of the most feared warriors in the tournament, had fallen. Not to a monster, not to another titan of war, but to a human. Then the first cheers erupted. It wasn't the laughter of mockery this time. It was real. It was admiration. Jason, the underdog, had risen beyond their expectations. He was no longer a fluke. He was no longer a joke. He was a contender. Jason stood over his fallen opponent, chest rising and falling with steady breaths. He looked up at the crowd. The same aliens who had mocked him now chanted his name. The tournament had changed. The galaxy had changed. And this was only the beginning. The galactic arena had never been louder. The echoes of thousands of voices blended into a deafening roar, shaking the very foundations of the massive Colosseum. The once doubtful spectators had turned into fanatics, shouting Jason Cole's name with growing excitement. The human warrior had done the impossible. He had defeated Thrix, outmaneuvered Varin, and humbled the mighty Gorvak the Executioner. But now, standing at the very peak of the tournament, he faced his greatest challenge yet. His final opponent was not just another warrior. It was a legend. Xerax, the Eternal, had never lost a single fight. A being of unknown origin, his body was a fusion of organic matter and living energy, pulsing with an eerie, otherworldly glow. He did not speak, did not show emotion. He simply fought, and he always won. His battles never lasted long, and his opponents never walked away the same. Those who survived spoke of his speed, his precision, and the way he seemed to predict every move before it even happened. He was more than just a champion. He was an executioner disguised as a warrior. Jason had watched his fights. He had studied every movement, every subtle twitch. And yet, he could not find a pattern. Xerax was unlike any opponent he had ever faced. If Jason was to win, he would have to do the impossible one last time. As the arena gates creaked open, Jason stepped forward, his body tense, but his mind focused. Across from him, Xerax floated into the battlefield, his feet barely touching the ground, his glowing form pulsing like a heartbeat. The crowd fell silent, the energy in the air shifting from excitement to raw anticipation. This was it. The final battle. The fight that would decide whether Jason was a fleeting miracle or a true legend. The gong rang. Jason had barely blinked before Xerax moved. He wasn't just fast, he was instantaneous. A blur of energy, a shadow of light, striking from all directions. Jason twisted, ducked, rolled, but he wasn't fast enough. A burning impact slammed into his ribs, sending him skidding across the arena floor. Pain flared through his body, but he forced himself up. Xerax didn't wait. Another flash, another hit, this time against Jason's shoulder. The force nearly dislocated it. The crowd gasped as Jason staggered, struggling to track his opponent. He had fought. Xerax lunged again, and this time, Jason didn't dodge. He moved in the opposite direction, a fraction of a second before impact. The alien's glowing strike barely missed, skimming past Jason's ribs instead of slamming into his chest. It was small, almost unnoticeable, but Jason had done something no one else had. He had forced Xerax to miss. He grinned, despite the pain. If Xerax could be tricked once, he could be tricked again. The next exchange was a dance of survival. Xerax moved like lightning, his strikes coming faster than any normal being could react to. But Jason was adapting. He was reading the shifts in energy, the tiny movements before each attack. He wasn't trying to match Xerax's speed, he was predicting it. Step by step, hit by hit, he was turning the battle in his favor. The crowd began to notice. The gasps turned into cheers as Jason dodged another devastating blow, countering with a precise strike to Xerax's side. The energy warrior recoiled for the first time in the entire tournament, showing something close to surprise. Jason didn't let up. He pressed forward, dodging, weaving, countering. His attacks weren't strong, but they were accurate, each one aimed at the shifting energy cores within Xerax's body. He could feel the fight changing. Xerax, for all his power, had never faced someone like him before. Someone who learned, someone who adapted. Jason was no longer fighting on Xerax's terms, Xerax was fighting on his. But the final move had to be perfect. One mistake, one miscalculation, and it would all be over. Jason took a deep breath, ignoring the burning pain in his limbs. Xerax charged again, this time moving faster than ever before. It was a desperate attempt to reclaim control, a last-ditch effort to overwhelm Jason before he could strike the finishing blow. But Jason was ready. He sidestepped at the last possible second, pivoting his entire body to redirect Xerax's own momentum. With a final burst of strength, he drove his fist into the very core of Xerax's chest, the heart of his energy flow. A shockwave rippled through the arena as Xerax's glowing form flickered violently. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, Xerax collapsed. The arena erupted. The cheers were deafening, the entire Colosseum shaking with the force of thousands of voices chanting Jason's name. He stood over his fallen opponent, breathing hard, his mind barely processing what had just happened. He had won. He had done the impossible. As he raised his fist in victory, Jason knew one thing for certain: he was no longer just an underdog. He was the champion, the legend, the first human to ever conquer the galactic arena. The galactic arena had never witnessed a moment like this. The air was thick with energy, the echoes of Jason Cole's victory still reverberating through the massive Colosseum. He stood in the center of the battlefield, his body battered and bruised, but his spirit unbroken. The same crowd that had once mocked his presence was now chanting his name with a fervor never seen before. The underdog had not only survived, he had won. He had defeated warriors thought to be invincible. He had bested Xerax the Eternal, a legend among the stars. And in doing so, he had rewritten the balance of power in the galaxy. As Jason stood tall, breathing heavily, the High Chancellor of the tournament stepped forward. A towering figure with crystalline skin that shimmered under the arena's lights. The Chancellor was the voice of the galactic elite. His presence alone commanded silence, and the entire stadium fell into a hushed anticipation. His glowing eyes studied Jason for a long moment before he finally spoke. In the history of this tournament, no being has ever accomplished what you have done, human, he declared, his voice amplified across the arena. You were underestimated, mocked, seen as weak. And yet, you stand before us, undefeated. A murmur spread through the crowd, and Jason could feel the weight of 1,000 species watching him, analyzing him, trying to understand how a mere human had shattered their expectations. The Chancellor continued, his tone carrying something rare respect. By the laws of the galactic arena, the champion holds the right to claim their prize. But your victory is more than a personal triumph. It is a statement. It forces us to reconsider everything we believed about your kind. He paused, glancing at the council members seated above. Humanity will no longer be seen as insignificant. Today, the galactic order changes. Jason exhaled slowly. He hadn't come here with the intention of changing history. He had fought to survive, to prove that he was more than just an outsider. But now, he realized his victory had become something bigger. Humanity was no longer a backwater species ignored by the greater powers of the universe. They had been thrust into the spotlight, no longer nameless beings from a distant world. The galactic empires, the warlords, the traitors, the rulers. As he looked around, he saw the mixed reactions of the gathered species. Some were in awe, their expressions filled with newfound respect. Others looked uneasy, their previous arrogance crumbling under the weight of reality. But there were also those who watched with something more dangerous in their eyes: fear. Because they understood what this victory meant. If one human could do this, what could an army of them achieve? Jason knew that this was only the beginning. Word of his triumph would spread across the stars, reaching the most powerful civilizations in existence. Some would see it as a sign of respect, an invitation to form alliances. Others would see it as a threat, a challenge to their authority. There would be those who sought to test humanity's strength, to see if Jason's victory was a fluke or the first glimpse of something far greater. Ase turned his gaze back to the Chancellor. Jason made his decision. He stepped forward, his voice steady despite the exhaustion weighing on him. "I claim my prize," he said, his words carrying across the silent arena. "But not for myself. I claim it for humanity." Gasps rippled through the audience. The implications were clear. He wasn't just fighting for personal glory. He had made humanity a recognized force in the galaxy. No longer a forgotten species, no longer overlooked. Their place among the stars had been secured, and there was no going back. The Chancellor studied him for a long moment before nodding. "Then, so it shall be," he announced. "Let it be known across the galaxy, humanity has risen." The arena erupted once more, a thunderous mix of cheers, whispers, and uneasy murmurs. Jason felt the weight of it all settling on his shoulders, but he didn't flinch. He had fought for this moment. He had earned it. And now, he would face whatever came next. Because for the first time in galactic history, humanity was no longer just another species. They were a power to be reckoned with.